Before we delve into the facts of this case, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the evidence log for more in-depth investigations. And let us know in the comments below where in the world you're watching from. It began quietly, as many such cases do, a tranquil morning on Lake Belle, broken only by the rhythmic hum of a small fishing boat. William Miller, a man of meticulous routine, left his home around 5 a.m. on October 12, 2022. He'd kissed his wife, Sarah, and set out for what he envisioned as a peaceful day of fishing. This was not unusual for William. He was known for his early starts, his careful preparation, always checking the weather, always making sure his gear was in order. He did this every time. But this morning there was no return. Hours later, at approximately 11:30 a.m., a local kayaker spotted something adrift near the eastern shore of Lake Belle, William's empty fishing boat. The kayaker noted a fishing rod oddly tangled in the water beside it. It was a detail that, at the time, seemed minor, perhaps just an unfortunate snag. But that detail matters. Here's where it gets strange. Sarah Miller, growing increasingly concerned as the hours passed, tried to reach William. By 2 p.m., after learning about the abandoned boat, she placed an urgent call to the Lakeport Police Department. William, she explained, was a creature of habit. He always called if he was delayed. An hour, even less, he'd always check in. His silence was already a screaming alarm, and it would only get louder. Empty boat, no trace. The Lake Belle mist had barely burned off that October morning, a morning that began like any other for William Miller. But for a local kayaker, paddling near the eastern shore, the scene shifted. At approximately 11:30 a.m., their peace was broken by the sight of an empty fishing boat. It drifted silently. This detail matters. It was William Miller's boat, and that's where it gets strange, a fishing rod, tangled not inside the vessel, but in the water nearby. The discovery immediately raised questions. An experienced fisherman like William wouldn't simply leave his gear in such a state. The boat was adrift, but there were no signs of William himself. No distress calls, no personal items scattered, just the empty vessel on a quiet lake. The Lake Belle Patrol was notified. Their initial assessment noted nothing outwardly suspicious beyond the missing occupant. But an empty boat, a tangled rod, and a seasoned fisherman vanished into thin air. The official version, even at this early stage, feels incomplete. What truly happened on Lake Belle that morning? And why was William Miller's boat, a vessel he treated with meticulous care, found abandoned with his main fishing rod, almost strategically in the water? The wife's urgent call. Sarah Miller's call to the Lakeport Police Department wasn't just a formal report. It was an urgent plea, a desperate attempt to find her husband, William, who had failed to return from his morning fishing trip. Now, here's where it gets interesting in Sarah's statement to police, a detail that should have immediately raised questions. William Miller, according to Sarah, was a creature of habit. He always calls if he's delayed, she insisted, even by an hour. His routine was meticulous. Strong coffee at 5 a.m., weather check, then out on Lake Belle. Any deviation, any unexpected delay, and William would contact her. Yet this day, October 12th, stretched on. No call. No William. Not after the empty boat had already been reported. That's not a small inconsistency. Most people might worry if a loved one was late. But Sarah Miller's concern was rooted in William's almost obsessive adherence to his schedule. The empty boat, drifting near the eastern shore, already suggested something was wrong. But the lack of communication from William himself, that was the alarm bell, signaling to Sarah that this was more than just a typical delay. This raises an important question. If William was merely delayed, or even if he had accidentally fallen overboard shortly after leaving, why was there no attempt at contact, no sign, until hours later? The official report noted the call came in at 2 p.m., but what truly transpired in those hours between the kayaker finding the empty boat at 11:30 a.m. and Sarah's desperate 2 p.m. call? The document reveals something different from a simple missing person report. It was a wife's growing dread. A dread fueled by a man's uncharacteristic silence, a silence that in William's case was deafening. A body identified. The discovery was grim. On October 13th at 8 a.m., search and rescue divers located William Miller's body. It was tangled in fishing nets at the bottom of Lake Belle, approximately 50 feet from where his boat had been found. This confirmed Sarah Miller's worst fears. The urgent call she'd made the day before now had its tragic answer. But this was not a simple recovery. The body was identified, yes, but the circumstances immediately raised questions. What doesn't add up is the depth and the entanglement. William Miller was an experienced fisherman. How did he end up so deeply enmeshed in nets, so far from his vessel? The initial assessment would attribute this to the chaos of accidental drowning, yet the evidence suggests a more complex scenario. The search team noticed something subtle, even in the murky depths: the way the nets were wrapped. It wasn't typical. It looked almost deliberate. We need to go back and check the record, because a body found like this, in these conditions, indicates more than just a fall overboard. This is the part that raises questions. Initial autopsy findings. The day after the discovery, October 14, 2022, brought the initial autopsy report. Dr. Evelyn Reed, the medical examiner, a woman known for her dry wit and an almost literary approach to unusual cases, delivered the findings. The official cause of death: drowning. This is where the narrative begins to solidify for some, suggesting a tragic accident. But here's where it gets strange. The report, while conclusive on drowning, also noted something else: suspicious bruising on William Miller's forearms. Small, yet distinct. They were initially dismissed, categorized simply as post-mortem aquatic trauma, damage sustained after death, perhaps from currents, debris, or the fishing nets themselves. That detail matters, because it allowed the official story to take hold so easily. It provided a convenient explanation for something that, upon closer inspection, might have required a more thorough examination. Was Dr. Reed simply overworked, overlooking a nuance? Or was it a detail so small, so easily explained away by the environment, that no one paused to question it further? For now, the report stood as official. William Miller drowned. Case closed, or so it seemed to Detective Mark Jensen, the lead investigator on the case, who had his own theories about Lake Belle. But those bruises, they remained in the file. A quiet discrepancy, waiting to be noticed. The unseen evidence. The initial autopsy report, performed by Dr. Evelyn Reed, stated drowning as the cause of William's death. But here's where it gets strange. The same report noted suspicious bruising on William's forearms. These were initially dismissed. Post-mortem aquatic trauma, they claimed. A convenient explanation, perhaps, for something they didn't want to see or couldn't explain. But William Miller's brother, David, a former Marine, wasn't convinced. He re-examined the boat, meticulously. What he found was a small, fresh indentation. On the stern, near the waterline. Too subtle for initial investigators, it seems. That detail matters because it contradicted the neat narrative of a simple, tragic accident. How does a man drown accidentally and acquire specific bruising, then have his boat show signs of impact? These were the questions that should have been asked immediately. Instead, on October 16th, lead investigator Detective Mark Jensen concluded William's death was an accidental drowning, based on previous incidents in the area, he said. A quick closure, perhaps. But what the official version leaves unexplained are those bruises, that indentation, and the nagging doubts of a brother who knew William's habits. It raises an important question. What exactly constitutes aquatic trauma in this context? And why were these marks not investigated further? A suspect emerges. David Miller, William's brother, a former Marine and a man who understood discipline and precision, had studied the details the initial investigators overlooked. He found a subtle indentation on the boat's stern, near the waterline. It was small, too small for the initial sweep. This detail matters because it suggested a contact event, a collision, not just a fall. It hinted at something beyond an accidental drowning. That's where it gets strange. Remember Detective Alice Chen, the junior officer? While the department accepted Detective Jensen's initial assessment of an accidental drowning, Chen returned to the case files. She meticulously re-reviewed the crime scene photos and notes. She zoomed in on the bruising Dr. Reed had noted on William's forearms, bruising initially dismissed as post-mortem aquatic trauma. Chen also cross-referenced water current patterns recorded on the day William disappeared. She found an anomaly. A subtle shift in the typical flow that day near William's fishing spot. The details, when layered, began to construct a different picture. Then another piece of the puzzle emerged. On November 5th, a local witness, Arthur Jenkins, came forward. He recalled seeing a red speedboat operating erratically near William's fishing spot on the morning of his disappearance. Jenkins distinctly remembered the sound of its engine, a specific high-pitched roar. This detail, combined with the subtle hull damage and the anomalous water patterns, was the first concrete lead suggesting a second vessel. A boat that shouldn't have been there. This isn't a small inconsistency. Chen recognized its significance immediately. If another boat was involved, William's death moved from tragic accident to something far more sinister. The witness statement provided a critical description: a red speedboat, a distinct color, a distinct sound. Chen began her search. Public records, local boat registrations, reports of reckless boating. It wasn't long before she found him, Robert "Bobby" Davies, local poacher. History of altercations with fishermen, and the owner of a bright red speedboat. The evidence was slowly, meticulously, leading her down a new path. A path that pointed directly to a suspect. The interrogation tapes. Detective Alice Chen, a junior officer on Jensen's team, had been meticulously re-reviewing the initial crime scene photos, focusing on the overlooked bruise details David Miller, William's brother, had pointed out. She had also noted an anomaly in the water current patterns recorded on the day William disappeared. Now, 2 days after she confirmed that crucial detail, a new piece of information came to light. A local witness, Arthur Jenkins, approached Chen with an unexpected lead. Jenkins recalled seeing a red speedboat operating erratically near William's usual fishing spot on the morning of his disappearance. That detail matters, because the initial investigation had dismissed any possibility of another vessel in the immediate vicinity. Jenkins remembered the distinct sound of its engine, something specific he couldn't quite place but undeniable. This was the first time that an outside factor, a potential third party, entered the investigation with any real weight. The witness statement shifted the entire frame of reference for Detective Chen. An accidental drowning scenario now had a significant external variable. What Jenkins recounted was enough for Chen to push back against Detective Jensen's closed case. This led her down a new avenue of inquiry, one that would eventually bring her to Robert Davies. Because a red speedboat, erratic behavior, and a distinct engine sound, these weren't random details. They painted a picture, and that picture started to resemble Robert "Bobby" Davies, a name that unfortunately was very familiar to local authorities. He was known for his aggressive and often illegal fishing practices, especially around William Miller's preferred fishing grounds. This connection wasn't coincidence. It was a direct challenge to the official narrative. The timeline now had to account for Bobby Davies and his speedboat in the same waters as William Miller that specific morning. What was initially considered a tragic accident was slowly, meticulously, evolving into something far more troubling. The evidence was speaking, and it spoke of confrontation. Alibi Under Scrutiny. Having established the initial flaws in Detective Jensen's investigation and the critical re-evaluation by Detective Chen, the focus naturally shifts to Robert Davies. He was brought in for questioning on November 12th, 2 days before Dr. Reed's re-examination and 5 days before the security footage surfaced. What did he say then? His story was simple. He was fishing on the opposite side of Lake Belle at the time of William Miller's disappearance. A seemingly ironclad alibi, if true, but here's where it gets strange. Davies's alibi was not just vague, it was inconsistent. When pressed for details, the exact spot, the time he arrived, the duration of his fishing, his responses shifted. One moment, he claimed to be near the north shore. The next, closer to the west. The times he provided for launching and packing up his boat varied by as much as an hour. That doesn't happen with a clear memory, not for an experienced fisherman like Davies, who knew the lake intimately. Detective Chen, already suspicious from the witness statement about the red speedboat, noticed this immediately. Experienced investigators understand that small inconsistencies in non-essential details can be easily forgiven. But large, shifting inconsistencies in a suspect's core alibi are a different matter. They signal a story being constructed, not recalled. The initial report from Detective Jensen's team noted Davies's vagueness but didn't flag it as significant, primarily because the official assumption of accidental drowning was still largely unchallenged. Yet this vagueness, this shifting narrative, would later become a critical crack in his defense. It was the first real hint that Davies was withholding more than just an inconvenient truth. What exactly was he trying to hide on the morning of October 12th? Forensics re-examined. Detective Alice Chen had a hunch, a nagging feeling that the initial forensics on William Miller's body were incomplete. The official report from October 14th noted drowning as the cause, but those specific bruises on William's forearms were dismissed too easily. Post-mortem aquatic trauma, they said. But Chen, disciplined and detail-oriented, saw something different. That wasn't a small inconsistency. She approached Dr. Evelyn Reed, the medical examiner who performed the initial autopsy. Dr. Reed, a woman who appreciated a good mystery, was initially hesitant. The case was closed, labeled accidental drowning. But Chen's persistence, her quiet insistence on re-examining the overlooked, resonated. Chen presented the photographic evidence again, pointing to the specific patterning of the contusions. Not random scrape marks, but something that suggested impact. She highlighted David Miller's discovery of the indentation on the boat. The one too subtle for initial investigators. It was a painstaking process, a re-evaluation of what was already deemed conclusive. Dr. Reed, fueled by her own analytical curiosity, agreed to a more thorough re-examination of William's body. This wasn't just a revisit, it was a deep dive, a microscopic investigation into the layers beneath the surface, and that's where it gets strange. During this meticulous process, Dr. Reed discovered microscopic paint flecks embedded deep within William's bruising. These weren't just skin abrasions, they were impacts that had driven foreign material into the tissue. The discovery was precise, undeniable. Analysis showed the paint flecks were a distinct shade of red, a shade that, to Chen's discerning eye, might just match a certain boat. This forensic re-examination, spurred by a junior detective's quiet defiance, did more than just reopen the case. It shattered the comfortable narrative of accidental drowning. It presented concrete physical evidence, tangible, microscopic proof that William Miller's death was not what it seemed. The timeline, the official account, and now the very body itself were all telling a different story after all. And that story was just beginning to unfold. The second opinion. The initial autopsy report, performed by Dr. Evelyn Reed, had attributed the bruising on William Miller's forearms to nothing more than post-mortem aquatic trauma. That detail, how easily it was dismissed, is where the official narrative begins to unravel. Detective Alice Chen, however, saw it differently. She looked at those same notes, the same photographic evidence, and something didn't sit right. For Chen, these weren't simply indistinct marks, they were specific. So, she approached Dr. Reed again, not with an accusation, but with a request, a second opinion, a deeper dive into what was initially overlooked. Now, here's where the perspective shifts. Dr. Reed, a medical examiner who prides herself on thoroughness, was confronted with her own initial assessment. It's a difficult position for any professional. Chen didn't push aggressively. Instead, she presented new context, the indentation on William's boat, the witness claiming a red speedboat, the vague alibis. This changes the framework. With the possibility of an altercation now on the table, those seemingly insignificant bruises took on new meaning. They were no longer just incidental damage from the lake. The medical examiner agreed to a more thorough re-examination. This is a critical turning point in any investigation when a professional is willing to revisit their own conclusions based on new information. Dr. Reed went back to the tissue samples, to the digital scans of William's body, focusing specifically on the areas Chen highlighted. What she found there, what her deeper analysis uncovered, fundamentally altered the course of the investigation. Inside the bruised tissue, microscopic flecks of paint were discovered. Red paint. This wasn't merely a coincidence. It was physical evidence, embedded in the victim's flesh, that directly pointed to an external impact, a collision, and what the color of that paint indicated that detail matters. Confronting the Lies. Detective Chen, iuż piona swoich ustaleń, przygotowuje ziogo konfrontacji. Nie chodziło już o zaginięcie czy wypadek, to była kwestia śmiertelnego pobicia i pozostawienia. Ślady farby, nagrani z kamery zeznania Swajtka Artura Jenkinsa, zuskite elementy układali się jeden. Spójny obraz, całkowicie sprzeczny z tym, co twierdził Robert Davies. 17 listopada, Chen odkryła nagranie z kamery bresa swęta u sklepie z brunetami, tuż przy jeziorze. Tu drobiazg niby mało istotny, ale w tym przypadku zmienia wszystko. Nagranie pokazuje Lodge Bobby'ego Daviesa wypływająca na jezioro o godzinie 4:45 nad ranem. Znaczny sienieng nie stwierdzils. Tu całkowicie podważyło jego alibi, lotre było już i tak mocno nieszczelne. Davies utrzymywał, że był na przeciwnym brzegu jeziora. Kamera danak pokazuje, że jest baktloikty tam, gdzie nie powinien być, bo mu mieszka, w którym znaleziono ciało Williama. Tu nie jest mala niespojniec. Tu było ciało prowadzone blat. Następnego dnia, 18 listopada, Bobby Davies zostaje ponownie wezwany na przesłuchanie. Tym razem detektyw Chen ma dowody, których nie da się zignorować. Pliszek farba, tyć mikroskopijnych fragmentów. To tre tak skrupulatnie usunął, by nie pozostawić śladu. A nagranie. Beznamiętne, ziarniste, ale niezwykle konkretne. Konfrontacja była intencjonna, śledczy przedstawili mu dowody jeden po drugim. Analizy drewna zodzi teraz wykazała nowopowstałe gniesienie, zeznanie Artura Jenkinsa o tym, że widział czerwoną lodź, wykonał ekspert Janaktar, rejd o mikroskopijnych cząstkach farby. Widział, jak jego staranie zbudowana historia rozpada się na kawałki. Alibi Daviesa runęło. Wykonał pekle. Robert Davies przyznał, że doszło do sprzeczki. Powiedział, że William Miller nikał go od tygodni, tu jego wersja. Terroryzował go, że poluje na jego terenie, groził, że zgrozi tu straży rybakiej. Davies zeznał, że tamtego ranka, w przyspływie wściekłości, zbliżył się sunio do lodi Williama. Niewielkie zderzenie miało być tylko ostrzeżeniem. Ale to il punkt, w którym wszystko wymknęło się spod kontroli. William spadł zody wodrost, du wody bamec. Davies, zamiast pomok, uciekł, to była wersja. Miał uderzyć Williama lodzian, a potem, widzak go łodzi, po prostu odblinął. A to gestu zmieni lokala dynamikę śledztwa. To nie był wypadek, to była konfrontacja. Telar skończyła się tragedia. Pamiętacie drobne ugniesienie na lodzi Williama, to treanlos jego brat, David. To idealnie pasowało do obrazu, a siniaki na predramionach Williama potwierdzają, że doszło do silnego kontaktu. To nie były obrażenia pośmiertne. Tu było ślady walki. Ślady oporu. A prowadzili one bezpośrednio do Bobby'ego Daviesa. Co ciekawe, Davies nie przyznał się do celonego zabójstwa, tego, że zabił Williama z premedytacją. Tu był cios, strach, a potem ucieczka. To nie zmienia danak faktu, że go opuścił. Zostawił go w jeziorze. Co działo się dalej i jak ostatecznie wzmytił ten tragiczny poranek? Tu historia na następny raz. The true timeline. The official record stated William Miller drowned, a tragic accident on Lake Belle. But as we've seen, that narrative began to unravel with every piece of overlooked evidence, the faint stern indentation, the water current anomaly. Now, it's time to build the true timeline, one that lays bare the collision of events, not happenstance. October 12, 5 a.m., William leaves home for his fishing trip. A meticulous man, always checking the weather, always precise. His wife, Sarah, confirms this unwavering routine. Hours later, at 11:30 a.m., a kayaker finds his empty boat, a fishing rod tangled in the water. The alarm for an accident is raised, and Sarah, knowing William's habits, instinctively understands something is deeply wrong. What she couldn't know was that crucial details were already being missed. The next day, October 13th, 8 a.m., William's body is recovered, caught in fishing nets. The initial autopsy, conducted by Dr. Evelyn Reed, lists drowning as the cause. Convenient. But even then, a small detail, suspicious bruising on William's forearms was noted and quickly dismissed as post-mortem aquatic trauma. That detail matters, as we will see. Detective Mark Jensen, the lead investigator, concludes by October 16th that it was simply an accidental drowning. Case closed, or so he believed. Yet, the evidence suggested otherwise. Remember William's brother, David Miller, a former Marine? He re-examined the boat, finding that subtle indentation on the stern. This was not a random mark. Then on November 1st, Detective Alice Chen revisits the initial crime scene photos. She looks past the surface, past Jensen's quick conclusion, and focuses on those dismissed bruises. She also spots an anomaly in the water current patterns for October 12th. The lake currents that day, they didn't quite fit the official story of where William's boat drifted. This is where the timeline really starts to break, because it implies external force, not just an unfortunate fall. Then a witness, Arthur Jenkins, comes forward on November 5th. He recalls seeing a red speedboat operating erratically near William's fishing spot that very morning. He remembers the engine's distinct sound. This was the moment the accidental theory truly fractured. A red speedboat. An aggressive sound. An erratic course. The coincidence was too jarring to ignore, pointing to a different sequence of events entirely. This timeline, painstakingly reconstructed, shows a different story emerges when we refuse to dismiss the inconvenient details. What it reveals is not just an accident, but an encounter. The confession. Confronted with the microscopic paint flecks, evidence Dr. Reed found embedded in William's bruises, and the damning security footage from the bait shop, Bobby Davies had nowhere left to run. His carefully constructed alibi, vague and inconsistent from the start, collapsed completely. He was brought in for a second, much more intense interrogation. The records show Detective Chen and Detective Jensen were both present. They laid out the timeline, piece by painstaking piece, his red speedboat launching much earlier than claimed, the erratic behavior reported by Arthur Jenkins near William's fishing spot, the paint, the bruises. Each fact a tightening noose. Davies, cornered, finally broke. He admitted there had been an altercation, a heated argument over fishing territory. William Miller, ever the protective fisherman of his usual spots, had confronted Davies. That's where it gets strange. Davies claimed William had tried to stop him. A struggle ensued. In the chaos, Davies said, his boat struck William. Not intentionally, he insisted. He claimed it was an accident, a tragic consequence of a moment of panic. William fell overboard after being struck by Davies's boat. The impact, the argument, the fall. It all happened in a span of moments. Davies, in a fit of pure panic, fled the scene, leaving William in the water. He didn't intend to kill him, he stated, just to scare him, to assert his dominance over the fishing grounds. But the speed of the boat, the force of the impact, it had been enough. By November 18th, just over a month after William Miller disappeared, Robert Bobby Davies formally confessed to inadvertently causing William's death. He admitted he panicked and left him to drown. This was the truth that the initial investigation, fixated on an apparent accident, had completely missed. The confession closed one chapter, but the next, the fight for justice, was just beginning. Justice for William. If you find our investigations compelling, please hit that like button, subscribe, and share where you're watching from in the comments below. It truly helps us bring more cases like William Miller's to light. Now, back to the case. The confession had finally been extracted. Robert Davies admitted to involuntary manslaughter. This meant William Miller's death was no accident. It was a direct consequence of a reckless confrontation, then a cover-up born of panic. For Sarah Miller, William's wife, it was a confirmation of what she had felt all along. Something far more sinister than a tragic fishing mishap had taken her husband. And for William's brother, David, the former Marine whose skepticism had pushed for further scrutiny, it was a bitter validation. The system, initially flawed, had ultimately worked, thanks in large part to Detective Alice Chen. Davies was formally charged on November 19, 2022. The evidence against him was overwhelming. The microscopic paint flecks from his red speedboat found in William's bruises, matching the exact make and model of Davies's vessel. The security footage from the bait shop, placing his boat on the lake hours before his fabricated alibi. The erratic behavior reported by Arthur Jenkins, the local witness. And finally, his own admission, detailing the heated argument over fishing territory. The struggle, the impact as William fell, and Davies's cowardly flight from the scene. He hadn't intended to kill William, he claimed, but he had left him to die. 3 months later, on February 20, 2023, the verdict was delivered. Robert Davies was found guilty of involuntary manslaughter and sentenced to prison. Justice, in this specific and painful instance, had been served. The official record could finally close the file on William Miller, not as a tragic accident, but as a life taken, then covered up. But a deeper question remains. What if Detective Alice Chen hadn't pushed? What if William's brother David hadn't been so persistent? What if Dr. Reed hadn't agreed to re-examine the body, focusing on those seemingly insignificant bruises? The initial report filed by Detective Jensen would have ruled William's death an accidental drowning, and Robert Davies would have continued his life, his secret buried beneath the deceptive calm of Lake Belle. That thought, that crucial distinction between an accident and a crime, that silence of unpunished truth, is where the real unease settles in. This case highlights how easy it is for an official narrative, even well-intentioned, to overlook small but vital pieces of evidence. It reminds us why the detailed work, the analysis of timelines, the cross-referencing of witness statements, and the meticulous re-examination of forensic data is so crucial. Because sometimes the truth isn't found in the loudest declaration, but in the quiet, persistent questions of those who refuse to let the story end too soon. Case closed for now. If you're interested in more investigations, check out our other videos here. And don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the evidence log.